Hi, I'm Conrad Marshall, and from the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age, welcome to Good Weekend Talks, a magazine for your ears featuring in-depth conversations with fascinating people from sport and politics, science and culture, business and beyond. Every week you can download new episodes in which top journalists from across our newsrooms talk to compelling people about the definitive stories of the day. In this episode, we speak with Senator Katy Gallagher. The busy politician is close with both Prime Minister Anthony Albanese and Treasurer Jim Chalmers, and manages an almighty workload too. With 4 big portfolios in finance, women, the public service and government services, she's also firmly in the crosshairs of the opposition, which has promised to slash jobs and cut back on diversity hires and working from home. Gallagher talks to us today about all of the above, but also her own life and times, including her unusual family upbringing and the immense tragedy she suffered with the loss of her fiancé, Brett Seaman, when she was nearly 27 and pregnant with their first child. Gallagher is the subject of our cover story this week, From That Worst Place, I Found a Way Out, and hosting this conversation is the writer of that in-depth profile, freelance correspondent Deborah Snow.
Senator Gallagher, Katy, thank you so much for coming in at an incredibly busy time. I should point out that this will be going to air on Saturday the 8th, which is International Women's Day. So in advance, happy International Women's Day.
And to you, Deb.
Thank you. Now, there's a big elephant in the room. You've been doing a little bit of campaigning out and about. You've also been in EIC for a budget that may or may not be coming up in March. Can you give us any hint at all as to when the election's going to be?
Well, that's a matter for the PM. He's one of the few things where he's the only decision maker. So that's a matter for him, but we're doing all the work that we need to do for the budget. A lot of the big decisions have all been done. They're taken weeks out and then all the busy work across departments happens. So all of that's in place. But yeah, I guess
You're riding 2 horses at once at the moment, yeah?
Well, there's certainly a feeling in the areas in there that the campaign's underway, and we know it's going to be held between now and the 17th of May. But that's politics. But we have to prepare and make sure the budget's ready to go, which it is.
So you have an incredibly important role in government. You have 4 portfolios: finance, women, public service and government services. And you're also the Senator for the ACT, and I think Norfolk Island as well, and you're the Manager of Government Business. How do you juggle it all?
Well, there's lots of different roles, but they all intersect nicely as well. So the portfolios, obviously the main one is the Department of being the Finance Minister, so through the Department of Finance. But, finance gives me that kind of whole of government reach and view. And so my portfolio of women, public service and now government services really works well with that central portfolio. I'm busy. I'm busy all the time. Lots of different balls in the air. My work in the Senate is really intense on sitting days, and my portfolio work is more intense on non-sitting days. So it all works out in the end.
So for people who don't really understand how the Senate works in detail, and that's probably most of us, tell us a little bit about what that managing the Senate looks like and what are the most important qualities that you have to bring to that role?
Well, Manager of Government Business in the Senate involves shepherding the government's legislative agenda through. And we always joke with our House colleagues who are in a majority chamber. That's more straightforward in the House where there's a majority of votes. In the Senate, there's 76 senators. The government has 25. So we have to make up all of those extra votes to get a majority to get anything done. And I'm not just talking legislation, it's any motion we want passed. Really, for the Senate to sit, we have to reach agreement. Everything that goes before the Senate has to pass the Senate with a majority of votes. So for us, that means we have to go around and get to the magic number of 39, which involves getting a few others to vote with us on everything.
Beg, borrow or buy.
Exactly.
Or not buy.
There's a lot of I think the most important role I have is to really manage the relationships across the Senate. The Senate's a very diverse chamber. We have, people who sit on the extreme right of politics to those on the far left, and then, both the parties of government as well. And so, yeah, sometimes it's a strange mix of votes that we get to get legislation through, but for me it's getting that majority vote and then I can get it done. Often it's a different mix to do that.
Now, there was a famous week in the last week of November where the government got 45 bills through, courtesy of a lot of the work that you did on the floor, with the Prime Minister obviously calling some of the shots behind the scenes. The opposition complained that you used the guillotine, as they call it. That's the mechanism that shuts off debate if you can get enough votes to support that. They said that you just rammed far too much through without the scrutiny of Parliament. Do you accept that there should have been a little bit more time taken with those things?
I've learnt the Senate will take as much time as the Senate has available. And when you've got an obstructionist opposition, which we did towards the end of last year and we have mostly through this term of Parliament, to get one bill through, you're pretty fortunate in a sitting week because you don't control the numbers. The time that's allocated to bills can take a very long time. And if a opposition or a crossbencher doesn't want a bill passed, they will filibuster. So it's not our preference to go to the guillotine, but we do want to get some legislation through. And as it turns out, towards the end of last year, we were able to convince a majority of senators that would be the right thing to do. Most of the bills go through committee. Most of the bills have been around a long time. In some of the cases, they've been around 2 years. And so, the end of the sitting year is always a bit of a lot. In that sitting week. This was a lot, I felt, but we got the job done.
I think I came and saw you in your office at the end of that week and I think you told me you were so dead you were only seeing with one eye, I think was what you said at the time.
I was pretty shattered.
Before we get on to your personal story, I just wanted to ask you this question. Jim Chalmers, the Treasurer, is a very close colleague of yours personally as well as professionally, and he had this to say about you. He said, some people are tough or empathetic, and Katy's both. That's her superpower. Nobody in politics is irreplaceable, but in our team, she comes the closest. How do you react to that?
Well, it's a very generous statement from Jim. I work really closely with him. He's, a wonderful colleague to have, and I think it works incredibly well that the Treasurer and Finance Minister are close colleagues and friends as well, and I do count him as a friend. So I find that very generous. I find people making nice comments about me a bit difficult, I just feel like I go to work and I try to do the best every day, but Jim helps me in the work I do and he helps me be a better person at the work I do. So I see it as a mutually beneficial relationship.
Let's come to your story, which your family story, your life story, which you were generous enough to share with us through the interviews that we've been doing. The way you were raised, I found, was really interesting. I mean, your parents were originally from England, but your mum, Betsy, was a real force. I know you're very close to both your parents, but Betsy had this penchant for bringing in waifs and strays, human and animal. Can you tell us a bit about how that was in your childhood and how that's rubbed off on you in how you approach your life today?
Yeah, so I feel very fortunate for the upbringing I had. Both my parents were very community-minded, very involved in their community. I think some of that might have come from the fact that they had no family around and friends when they first turned up here in Australia, and I can't imagine how difficult that would have been. I try to place myself in that situation, going to a country across the world with family and friends who you spoke to or wrote to, and weeks would pass. So
I forgot to mention there, or perhaps you could. Your mum had 4 children under the age of 5, didn't she? When she in the early 70s, yeah.
That's right. So she, when she was when they moved to Canberra, my parents had my sister and I, and then the 2 boys pretty close. So there was 4 children
adopted,
under 5.
Adopted,
they were both adopted, but we were all close in age, and. Yeah, I can't imagine how isolating that could have been for mum at home with 4 children. She made friends in the neighbourhood, but she also went about, building up groups, whether it be mother and children groups in those days or getting herself known. And that then as we got older, that became a bit more, formalised, even though it's still pretty informal to today's standards.
So just to be clear, she was actually, I think, giving mothers in crisis that she knew through her networks kind of informal respite care.
That's
respite
right.
care of their children, wasn't she?
Yeah.
She was giving them breaks. They'd turn up at your family dinner table.
Yeah, they would. So I think she recognised in other women perhaps some of the isolation and pressure she had when she first, had arrived with very young children. She was a nurse by background, so I think a lot of that sort of caring, compassion came through that, and probably why she wanted to be a nurse. But yeah, she would recognise a mum in need, and all of a sudden we'd have a couple of new faces at the dinner table with Dad looking a bit confused about what was going on. You couldn't do it now, obviously, with all the rules in place, but I know she ensured that through doing that, sometimes the children would stay with us for weeks. It wasn't like overnight.
Yeah.
They would stay for a period of time until the mum, often a single mum, would get her life back in order. And I know for a fact that she kept families together through that. In situations where children might have been removed, she was able to kind of band-aid and support them and let those mothers know that they mattered and people cared about them, which I think was really instructive for us as well, who in comparison had a pretty privileged life. I mean, Mum and Dad didn't have a lot, but we never went without, and we had two loving parents. We had close community. We had parents who cared about us, our education. And so being exposed to families where life was a lot tougher was really a good and important lesson for us.
So as well as these children who'd occasionally come in and out, there was a menagerie happening in your childhood home, wasn't there? Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, so Mum was, I mean, this is part of why it's so sad that we lost her so early, because I'd love to go through some of this now as more of an adult and kind of work through what went on. But we had a lot of animals, Mum and Dad. Dad was an animal lover, not quite as much as Mum. And, we had lambs at one time. We had 3 lambs that Mum had saved from an abattoir. We had a kangaroo. We had mice. We had guinea pigs. We had cats. I don't think we had any birds from memory at all. But, there was always a lot going on. And the kangaroo obviously and the sheep were a new element that we had in our residential back garden. They eventually went on to farm. Mum would find them all homes as well. So the sheep went on to being mascots and hobby farms, and the kangaroo eventually, Tippy, the kangaroo, went to the animal park in Canberra when she got too old to be in a backyard.
I think you told me a story. I didn't put this in the article, but I think you told me that you and your mum went back to visit Tippy, and you went a bit too early, and Tippy got a little bit upset.
It was heartbreaking, and I don't think we went back again. I don't think I went back again, because Tippy had a special blanket, and she had a little bit of the blanket that she kept in her pouch. And when we went back, kangaroos make quite a sound for their mother, or who they think their mother figure is, and it was awful, and we all went running away crying. But Tippy went on to have a very nice life.
Good,
they did, and she had lots of her own children and things, and we recovered eventually.
Your father was a big influence on you too. We shouldn't leave him out of the story. Your father, Charles, and he was became a lawyer and worked in the parliamentary office, I think, for a while, parliamentary library, went into the health department. He was an activist for prisoners' rights. So he was another big influence on you, wasn't he?
He was perhaps he certainly had a big impact on my politics. So Dad was a Labor Party member and very vocal about what he thought was important when it came to politics. Mum was always a bit more far left wing. She had a nuclear disarmament sticker on
left for Labor, you told me.
She had a nuclear disarmament sticker on the back of our car, which used to drive my dad mad. But so Dad had that influence on me. But yeah, he was more introverted than Mum. she was a stronger personality in the relationship. But he was a quiet achiever as well. So, of course, he was a wonderful father, but he was a lifeline counsellor, telephone counsellor for many years, and actually became a trainer of the counsellors over time. And also at that time, Canberra didn't have a jail, and so we shipped all our prisoners to New South Wales, to Goulburn or Long Bay, and often that disconnected families, again, usually disadvantaged families. So Dad he became an advocate. He worked for, ensuring that family connections were kept. So it was similar to some of the work Mum was doing, but using his legal expertise to help that. But yeah, again, the message I think they gave to all of us children was, it's not just enough to be in your community, you must be a part of it and you need to contribute, and that was something that we obviously was exposed to from a pretty young age.
I know you've recounted before the story of the loss of your then fiancé, Brett Seaman, in a horrendous bike accident, I think when you were just 26, almost 27. I was struck with your reflections on what the long-term effects were of that on you. And for those who haven't yet read the piece, can you just briefly tell us again what happened and how that sort of reverberated through your later philosophy in life?
Yeah, so that day, it's still sort of, it's pretty stark in my memory, as it would be on any day that people go through where you come to a part of almost a fork in the road and you go off on a completely different direction than you thought you were heading in. So that day we were coming home from Brett was a cyclist. He'd been riding essentially a long ride down around Mount Beauty, around that part of the world, and we'd driven up
New South Wales South Coast.
We were at the South Coast, so it's sort of halfway on our way home. Yep. And we'd stopped out just for a weekend, recovery, and Brett went out for a recovery ride essentially, and we'd arranged to meet at the beach about 2 hours later, and I went to our designated meeting spot and he never turned up. And after about it would have been a half an hour, I got worried and sort of started the process of looking for him, which took a lot of that afternoon, driving around looking for him. And at some point during the afternoon there was a message on the radio that said that the police were looking for a family of a cyclist who'd been killed that day. And I was driving, I heard that, and I knew straight away it was him.
You were pregnant at the time.
Yeah, so I was in the sort of first trimester of pregnancy. We were looking, obviously, before that moment, we were looking forward to that year because it would be the year our baby would be born. Life would go to the next stage, I guess, of a relationship. And so we were in a very good place, and I guess the world was before us. We felt very lucky and all of that, and then obviously this happened and it changed. It ended his life and changed mine forever.
And what do you think changed in you after that carried you forward? Because of course you then repartnered a few years later. You now have 3 children, 2 more with your current partner, Dave Skinner, very happily together.
Yeah.
But what lingered, do you think, from that tragedy in terms of how it forged your approach to difficult times or obstacles or challenges that you come up against?
Well, I do feel very fortunate, obviously, that I found love again, and we built a new family from just a family that Abby and I, which was Brett and my daughter Abby, who was born in August of that year. Look, I think for me, I went to the lowest place I think a person can go through that. And it was a mix of things. Obviously, sudden loss, an accident like that is shocking for anyone. But I think I actually not only went through that, but then got really very depressed through that. And so I think I got so unwell that it wasn't, if there can be a normal response to that type of incident, Mine wasn't quite like that. So I became very unwell and I needed a lot of help to recover from that. But I think if the question you're going to is really about how did I get through it? How did it shape me?
And what did you then carry through, I suppose, in all the years since? Because it's been how many years now?
It's 27.
27,
yeah.
That
it was really, well, I learnt to be incredibly tough because I think if you climb out of a hole like that and you're able to get yourself together, which I did, and it took months, it took years, if I'm entirely honest, it takes a lot to take you back there. So it gives you perspective, gave me strength ultimately, and I am generally an optimist by nature, and so I always look for the good that comes out of things. This was, incredibly difficult. I wouldn't wish it on anybody, but it did help shape me and, made me grateful, made me strong, made me independent. I didn't imagine I would be a single mother living on my own in a house, with, no certainty of income and all those things. And I had to pull myself together and get myself together because a baby was relying on me. I couldn't just wallow around and think, well, this is the end of it then, because I had this gorgeous little baby who needed me and had no one else.
Well, I think as we spell out in the piece, you then went on to have a career in the union movement, then into the ACT Legislative Assembly, from there into the Senate, and I think the rest were most of us know. Obviously, there were some bumps along the road there, but then your third child, Evie, you and she went quite public recently about the fact that she's on the spectrum for autism and ADHD and a couple of other things. And obviously that has special challenges. She's a lovely kid, having met her. I mean, what's your message to parents who might have a child who's just received a diagnosis like this? What have you learnt since that became the reason why you started to understand that's the reason why she has her particular challenges?
Yeah, what would I say? I mean, I think the message for me out of all of it is never stop advocating for your child, and I think most parents do that. But I feel once we understood the beautiful, complex, wonderful package that is Evie, it helped us be better parents for her. And, I don't beat myself up about much or have regrets or look backwards because, life's too short and all of that. But I do feel if we were able to get her sorted and understood a bit earlier than we did, life would have been easier for her and probably for the rest of the family as well, because she, everyone knows the stories of a problem child or a child that you can't quite get your grip on. As a parent, she was a handful for me and her dad. But, now that we actually understand how her brain works, how she works, what she finds hard, what she finds easy, we're able to be, much better. Yeah. And it's a much better life for her too, that she's not beating herself up thinking, she's not normal, if there is a normal in this world. And so it's been much better since we got the diagnosis, but it was hard getting to that point. Yeah. And I feel like I know government systems. I know, how to book assessments. I kind of knew there was something not right, but it still took me years and years to get through.
Given that, you've got such a busy life and you're managing all this as well, I think that's something that a lot of adult Australians probably have to try and work into their lives. Katy, you adore animals. We talk a little bit about your magpie family in the piece. We won't go into that just now, but you've tried to persuade Dave to have more than one dog. He's not having it, is he?
No. I think
you said you'd like to have 100.
Well, I'd like to have a dog rescue one day. Dave's not that keen on it. He loves animals too, but he thinks we're an only dog household. And so, I have to work with him. He's the, co-captain of the household, so I can't just bring in what I'd like in animals. But I love any animal.
Let's talk a little bit of politics. One of your jobs, Minister for the Public Service, that's shaping up as a big election issue. The opposition leader, Peter Dutton, has indicated that he'll make savings by reversing some of the 20% or so growth of the federal public service on your watch. And In addition, it plans to wind back working from home for public servants and perhaps reducing the emphasis on diversity and inclusion. How much do you think the electorate is going to focus on any of this? And has he got a point that, you know, really government can't afford to be growing at this pace when the economy is still trying to sort of get itself up, up to speed a bit more?
Yeah, look, I think the public service will be front and centre in this campaign, clearly. It's going to be a contested space. I mean, in response to the criticisms that Mr Dutton has made about the size of the public service, I would say, it's resourced properly now. I don't think it was resourced properly under the former government. And the other big difference is there was an over-reliance on contractors and consultants. So there was a lot of labour hire, a lot of temporary workers that bought in. And so the quality of service matters. And I think that does matter to Australians. I think if you talk to them about, would you like to spend 10 minutes longer on the phone waiting to get Centrelink? If you're a veteran, do you want your claim allocated in 2 weeks or a year? I think those things do matter, and it's about making that real for people. I think one of the good things about government is that you shouldn't be so noticeable in people's lives that they're frustrated with dealing with you. But if you did sit down and say to people, these are all the way the Commonwealth government actually touches your life, I think they would be surprised, because it isn't as obvious as engaging with your state or local government. And I think the public has a right to have good quality public services, and I think that is a difference between us and the opposition.
Does he and his spokesperson, Jane Hume, have a point when they say that too many people working from home denies the opportunity for younger people to absorb lessons from the workplace, that you to some extent you compromise connectivity and creativity and teamwork? Is there a point there?
Well, I think both on the diversity front and the working from home front, we have to accept there's a little bit of importing of overseas policies going on at the moment that seem to be being pulled into Australia. And I would say, look, let's have a policy debate about what's right for Australia, not what might be happening in the US, for example, no matter how politically attractive that may be. But the other point is, I think hybrid working, some working from home, some in the office, is going to be a feature of modern workplaces. The public service has to attract talent. We have to attract it outside capital cities. We have to attract it in rural and regional parts of Australia if we want the best. And the hybrid arrangements works. For that, we saw a lot of it in COVID. I think the average working family, if you've got two parents or two adults working from home arrangements can really improve that whole kind of unit's happiness if they are able to manage things that suits them. So I've asked the Public Service Commissioner about a month or two ago to have a look at how working from home arrangements are working in practice, so that we can get sort of up-to-date advice. This is the first, I think we've had a year of the new enterprise agreement being in place, which only gives people the right to ask for it. I heard some from my opposite number saying that they can demand it. They can't. And let's just have a look. Let's use evidence. Let's be clear about what works, what doesn't work for the employer, and what works, what doesn't work for employees, and then make decisions. But I can't see a world where some working from home, particularly if you're in a role that can do that, isn't part of the employment question.
Now, you're close to Prime Minister Albanese, as well as your economic colleague, Jim Chalmers. Why is he going so badly in the polls? You see him up close. What do you see that the public isn't seeing, that voters seem to be turning off?
Well, I mean, I'll let others talk about polls. I work, as you say, closely with Anthony, and I see a very decent, hard-working man who spends his whole day, every day, trying to work out how to make good decisions in the best interests of the country. He's funny, he's hardworking, he's hugely loyal and supportive. He'll always, if he thinks you've had a hard day, he'll give you a call, he'll come and pop in to see you. He looks after people. He's excellent with relationships. He values them. He treats people incredibly politely and decently, and he works really, really hard, and he never stops thinking. So I really I've been very privileged to work with great people in politics, not always the case, but I feel very privileged to work closely with him and help him implement his agenda.
I will just touch briefly on the Brittany Higgins saga. We won't go into the ins and outs of it because, of course, there's still court cases running. But you did have a bit of a bad run with your entanglement with it because you were accused of misleading the Senate. There was a bit of a dust-up between you and Linda Reynolds on this recently. She still thinks she's waiting. Well, she still wants an apology from you for the way she felt that you had run the attack on her over the way she'd handled that. Do you feel you still owe her an apology, or do you feel you've given her one?
Well, look, I said to her last week in estimates, and I'd already said it in the chamber, I am sorry that people got hurt through this, what happened to Ms Higgins at Parliament. I don't think anyone, who's watched that story or been involved in some way ever understood exactly where, the twists and turns that case would take. But no one went in with the intention to hurt anybody. I asked reasonable questions. I've gone back and I've had a look at them. An alleged rape, or if you agree with Justice Lee's decision, a rape happened in Parliament House in a minister's office, and I think it would have been incredibly unusual for there to be no questions asked about that. And following on from that, we have taken so many steps and made so many changes to make sure a situation like that never happens again in Parliament House, and I've been kind of central to putting in place those reforms, because I think Parliament House should be the safest workplace in the world, and certainly the safest workplace in the country, and that wasn't the case on that particular day.
Are you going to be campaign spokesperson again?
Yes. Jason, Claire and I are joint. Yes, we're doing the joint role through the campaign.
I've been reading a lot of criticism about the government's spending. Now, I know you and Jim Chalmers, you put together back-to-back surpluses. You've talked about $92 billion in savings that you made. You're the finance minister, of course, so you're right across all this stuff. But we know that going forward, it's going to be deficits again. And there's been increasing drumbeat of criticism from the business community and some independent economists about the rate of government spending. And I noticed just this morning I was reading the Financial Review saying it's been the biggest spending increase for a first-time government since the Whitlam era 50 years ago. Have you been spending like drunken sailors, as the opposition says, and is it time to exert a bit more discipline?
Well, I won't be certainly listening to an opposition that wants to spend $600 billion on nuclear power reactors and basically cut services in order to deliver it as a criticism of our approach to the budget. Look, we inherited a budget mess, that's for sure, and we've been methodically working through it and making sure we're resourcing areas that Australians value properly. We've had to find savings, and we've done that. As you say, we've had a surplus, 2 surpluses. We've lowered debt. We've lowered interest on that debt, which is really important. And we've found room for things like Medicare, for housing programs, for education and training and support, for defence, in aged care. If you look across the board, these were areas that had been neglected, and people were suffering out-of-pocket costs in health, school resourcing, public schools not being resourced properly. I think most people would agree that should be a pretty big priority for the government. Defence was in a mess in terms of its capability. We've sorted through that. We've done a lot of work, and that has involved making decisions about where investments go. Now, I would challenge our record on sorting through all that and investing in those priority areas with an opposition whose policy to date is nuclear power reactors and cuts to Medicare and that to pay for it. So there is a contrast in our budget approach. we've been responsible, I think, with the budget, but we also have to accept that we're going through big demographic change where the pressures on the budget are real. NDIS, aged care, healthcare, those areas need to be resourced properly. And we get the fact that you have to be efficient and effective with taxpayers' dollars. We go through this every ERC meeting line by line about where we can find savings, where we can reprioritise to make sure. But I think ultimately, at the end of the day, if you want services funded properly, we need to find room in the budget for it.
Well, I guess it'll be over to the electorate soon enough to make its choice and make a decision. Thank you so much for joining us, Senator Katy Gallagher.
Thanks very much, Deb.
That was Senator Katy Gallagher being interviewed by journalist Deborah Snow on the latest Good Weekend Talks. If you enjoyed this episode, please remember to subscribe, rate and comment wherever you get your podcasts, and keep tuning in for more compelling conversations. Coming soon, we chat with celebrity chef Curtis Stone on the eve of the Melbourne Food and Wine Festival starting March 21st. Good Weekend Talks is brought to you by the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age. Proud newsrooms powered by subscriptions. To support independent journalism, search Subscribe Sydney Morning Herald or The Age. This episode of Good Weekend Talks is produced by Conrad Marshall and edited by Tim Mummery, with technical assistance from Taylor Dent. Our executive producer is Tammy Mills, Tom McKendrick is head of audio, and Greg Callahan is the acting editor of Good Weekend.